Hi there, folks. So this video is going to be a continuation of the series I did on the Yuba County 5. If you're interested in that case, then this video is for you. And there's going to be more to come after this as well. But in this video, we're going to be putting an emphasis on the only witness to the tragedy that befell the Yuba County 5, and that man's name is Joseph Shones. I'll also be showing you some on-scene footage of key locations related to this case. I'll basically take you on the exact same journey the Yuba County 5 took on the night that they disappeared. Seeing these areas, especially the location where Joseph Shones got his car stuck in the snow, is very revealing. But perhaps most importantly, I want to go over some new evidence that nobody really knows about. And I actually hesitate to say new evidence, but it kind of is. It's new evidence people haven't ever heard before, but it comes from something old that's been around for a long time. I'm talking about a 2-hour interview between Joseph Shones and the families of the missing men, recorded all the way back in 1978 after the boys disappeared. We'll go over the reasons why nobody has ever really heard what's on that tape and the work it took to try and remedy that issue for this video. So we have the unique opportunity to hear more about what Joseph Shones saw and experienced when he encountered the Yuba 5 on the night of February 24th. The same night that the boys disappeared. And if you're only somewhat familiar with the Yuba County 5 case, and you hear me say the name Joseph Shones, but you have no idea what I'm talking about, or if you're totally unfamiliar with the subject in general, then I would highly recommend that you go to my channel catalog and watch the 2-part series I made on this case. It's probably the work I am most proud of. That background information will really help in understanding the material we're going to cover in this video. There is a whole lot of details and information available in this case. I can't adequately cover it all in the intro, and we're only going to be adding to it with this video. With that said, I will quickly go over the briefest of refreshers regarding the key points and events surrounding the Yuba County 5 case. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank ZocDoc for sponsoring this video. I'm very pleased to be working with them again, as they offer an excellent free service for those seeking a medical provider. And I don't know about you, but I'm the type of person who doesn't go in for regular medical checkups. Then something inevitably pops up and I go on a mission to seek out an appointment as quickly as I can find one. But you usually learn you can't be seen for weeks. That's never a great position to be in. As I've gotten older, I'm really trying to focus on prioritizing my health, and I do prefer things that can just be simple and straightforward, especially when booking a doctor's appointment. This is one area where today's sponsor, ZocDoc, can be very beneficial, because you can often get appointments within 1 to 3 days, and sometimes even on the same day. When you go on the ZocDoc website, you can sift through high-quality in-network doctors, then pick the one that fits your needs and book the appointment. It can all be done online from the comfort of your own home. What's really great is that you can pick a doctor you want and then see what openings they have and when. So you can schedule the day and time that works best for you. You don't have to get on the phone with someone and have them start throwing random dates at you. With just a few clicks, you can book an appointment and get the care you need. The goal for everyone should be to try and find a doctor that makes them feel heard, one that truly understands your needs. That's why finding a good doctor is so important, and ZocDoc makes that process a whole lot easier and more accessible. And again, this service is free, so you don't have to pay to find doctors near you or book an appointment. It's surprisingly simple. You can find doctors that take your insurance, you can find dentists, eye care, or skin care specialists, pretty much any kind of medical professional you can think of. There are well over 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty on ZocDoc's website. So stop putting off those doctor or dentist appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/enigma. That's ZocDoc.com/enigma, or you can click on the link in the description below to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. So a big thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. This incident took place on February 24th, 1978, and involved 5 men: Jack Hewitt, Ted Weir, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Gary Mathias. All 5 men had varying degrees of mental handicap or mental illness, the severity of which is often overblown. That night, they traveled from their homes in and around Yuba City and took Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego up to see a basketball game in Chico, a town to the north. They made it to the game, but once it was over and they started heading home, something happened to cause them to veer off course, and we don't know why. Suffice to say, they did not come home that night, and a search would be started shortly thereafter. The Mercury Montego would officially be found in the mountains above Oroville 4 days after they disappeared, so the Yuba County Sheriff finally had a place to start a search, but it was soon discovered that there was one witness to whatever occurred on the night of the 24th, a man named Joseph Shones from the nearby town of Berry Creek, and he was in the area that same night. He had been drinking at a couple bars before heading up into the mountains and getting his Volkswagen Beetle stuck in the snow. While trying to get his car out, he had some kind of heart attack and fell asleep in his vehicle. Later that night, he claimed to be awoken by a car pulling up behind him. He heard some whistling sounds, saw some lights, and also saw people walking around. Now, Joseph Shones has told many different versions of this story, and none of them are very consistent, but they usually go a little something like this. He called for help by opening the window of his car as he believed he was dying from a heart attack, but he was ignored. Mr. Shones then exited his vehicle and climbed a snowy hill nearby to give himself a better vantage point. When he looked down at the road, he saw 2 vehicles, the Mercury Montego that belonged to the Yuba boys, and a reddish truck parked behind it at an angle. Mr. Shones never pinned down the number of people he saw. In one case, he stated there were anywhere between 2 and 12, which is quite a range. Either way, despite Shones calling for help from atop the hill, he claims everyone piled into the red truck and left the area. Shones would spend the rest of that night in his vehicle, and his car would eventually run out of gas, which meant no heat. The following morning, he made a roughly 7-mile walk down the hill to a bar called the Mountain House. After arriving at around 9 a.m., he sat down at the bar and made an interesting statement to the bartender, saying, "I should have done this 2 years ago." 2 patrons of the Mountain House offered to give Shones a ride back to his home in Berry Creek. While in the car, Shones told these 2 witnesses what happened the night prior, except he told a completely different story. In this version, he said he was tailgated up the road by a car that followed him so closely he felt he had no opportunity to turn around or pull over. When he tried to go uphill in the snow, his vehicle became stuck and he became very angry. He blamed the entire situation on this other vehicle that had been following him. After getting dropped off at his house, Shones would eventually be admitted to the hospital for a mild heart attack. Once contacted by the police, Mr. Shones never told that story about being followed by a vehicle ever again. Instead, he told the story involving the red truck. Still, the search for the Yuba boys continued and ultimately failed. The case wouldn't see a break until June when the snow melted and Ted Weir would accidentally be discovered in a forest trailer near the Daniels Inc. campground. His body was wrapped in sheets, emaciated, and showed signs of severe frostbite on the feet. Afterwards, 3 other boys, Madruga, Sterling, and Hewitt, would be found in relatively quick succession, their remains being found along a forest road that leads to the trailer where Weir's body was found. It appeared that they died almost one after another as they struggled through the snow and cold to find shelter. The only man who wasn't found was Gary Mathias, and he is still missing to this day. Now, obviously, that is a very bare-bones description of events. If you need a better refresher, please check out the previous videos, which I will link in the description. But let's move on to some new evidence. So I'm sure most people have probably never heard of this, but there exists a 2-hour conversation where the families of the missing Yuba 5 basically question and interview Joseph Shones, and one of the parents recorded it. I have this recording thanks to another researcher and author, Tony Wright, so I owe him a great debt of gratitude. But the reason you likely haven't ever heard anything from this tape is because nobody really knew what was on it. It was recorded in 1978 on a piece of equipment that is, let's just say, not great. You can tell people are talking, but it sounds like it was recorded underwater by a freeway with waves crashing over it from time to time. I'll play you a brief Little Ross sample just so you can see what I mean.
Completely quiet, or the opposite. The headlights are on, the taillights are on. Parts of the time when it got too warm, I couldn't really reach the heater control, so I would crack a window or door. And some part of the time I'd even crack the door, which lights up the interior. So there was no question about me not being seen. That I know.
So obviously this is an unfortunate situation. We have a long interview with the only witness in this case, a man whose testimony we've only ever heard through the filter of a sheriff's deputy or a newspaper reporter. Well, I've had this recording for around a year now, I think, and I've always felt like I just had this little treasure chest that I just don't have the key to. I tried to find some audio experts to take on the job of cleaning it up, but nobody wanted to do it. And that's not on them, obviously. It's an old tape recording turned into a digital file. I can accept the fact that maybe it just is what it is. I did try a couple of AI audio transcribers, but they all completely choked on it. So I felt like the final option available to me was to put on some headphones and listen to the tape over and over and over again, and try to develop some sort of transcript. I spent way too many hours listening to this thing every day, and it was the most headache-inducing task I've ever done for this channel, but I got pretty good at understanding gobbledygook. So far, I've been able to extract about 21 pages of dialogue from this tape, and a lot of reasonably clear questions and answers. I'd personally say that I have a confidence level of 90% or more in terms of accuracy of the transcript, with the occasional word here or there possibly being incorrect, but usually in those cases I make a note of it. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of talking that is indiscernible. We may never know what they're saying. But we have what we have, so let's go over what I've found in this tape and how it compares to what Joseph Shones has said in past interviews. We'll go through this recording chronologically, and mostly I'm just going to go over the stuff that is clear, whole sentences and thoughts. There are a lot of small fragments I'll mostly ignore because I want to leave most of the guesswork out of it. Anyway, let's get into it. To begin, Shones is asked about how much snow was on the ground that night. He says his car was stuck in 10 to 12 inches of snow, and the boy's car was stuck in a few inches at most. The family sounded really surprised to hear this. Shones goes on to tell the family that he was very angry that night, that he felt that he had been abandoned while trying to ask for help. The families ask why Shones' wife didn't call the authorities after going up into the mountains the next day to get his car out of the snow. He says that at the time she was solely worried about him, not who the people were that owned the Montego. But he had told her to find out who the Montego belonged to because he wanted to have them arrested for ignoring his cries for help. A bit later, they ask Shones to start from the beginning of his story. Shones says it was 5:30 in the evening, not quite dark yet, but twilight. He says he got stuck in the snow and he had almost gotten himself out when he had a heart attack. He says he ran out of gas around midnight and prior to that was using the motor to keep himself warm. Shones says that he later thought about stealing the boy's Mercury Montego to get to safety, but that the keys weren't in it. When asked what time the Yuba boys pulled up behind him, he says that it was sometime between 11 and midnight, probably 11:30 p.m. He says that when they pulled up, he didn't hear any talking, but he heard some whistling, and later he begins whistling as an example. So he clearly implies that there was a human whistling when the boys pulled up, like trying to get someone's attention. It wasn't a squeaky serpentine belt in a car or something. Shones then says that he saw at least 2 people initially, and one came up to his window, though he doesn't say that he could make out any of their features. At least, nothing like that is audible on the tape. A family member asks if these people had flashlights. Shones says that they might have had flashlights as someone was flashing a light on and off, but it could have been something else as well. In this version of his story, Shones appears to say that he saw 2 to 3 people that night. He does seem to imply that when the pickup showed up around midnight, he saw more, but it's unclear. Shones says that the pickup appeared to be an older one, and he also seems to say that he couldn't identify what color it was. He's asked about the color again later, probably because newspapers had reported it as being a red or rust-colored truck, and Shones maintains that he did not see the truck's color. He says the color red or rust was suggested to him, and he may or may not have just gone along with it. A family member asks him if he heard any commotion around the cars, and he says he didn't hear anything. Shones goes on to describe how he exited his vehicle at some point and then started crawling. This is presumably the point where he crawls up a hill to get a better view, at which time he sees more people moving behind the vehicles. In describing the people, Shones says that there was no panic and no scattering into the night. A family member asks Shones if he said he saw a woman with a baby or a man wearing a cowboy hat. Shones says that where they were standing, there seemed to be a man and a woman and a child. A family member asks him if the boys ever saw him or tried to talk to him. Shones says that while he was in the car, he was laying down in the back seat, and with the little light that they had, perhaps they didn't see him. A little later, Shones says that while he was in his car, his headlights and taillights were on, and it got too warm, but he couldn't reach the heater control, so he cracked a window to let the cool air in. Shones says that he also left his door ajar just a little, which caused the interior lights to turn on. Because of this, he says there's no question about him not being seen by the people behind him. But he says these other people couldn't get the Montego out of the snow, and they couldn't get it started, so they left. Shones says that it wasn't all that cold up there that night, but to bear in mind that he had been sitting in his car. He doesn't seem to know how the boys and others left either. His only response is, "They were there and then they were gone, and I got to thinking they were never there." Shones goes on to describe his 7-mile walk to the mountain house the morning after the incident. He says that he was constantly on the lookout for tracks to lead him to a house or something he could break into to find a phone or a radio to call for help. Shones would later state that he had never been up in this area before the night of February 24th. The family members seem to express skepticism about someone being able to drive up that mountain road without knowing it well. Shones seems to hit back that he is experienced when it comes to rough roads, having lived in Berry Creek for a while where rough roads are common. The family had the same feeling about the boys. They had a tough time believing that Jack Madruga could or would be able to navigate the road up into the mountains. But Shones says that the road is no problem, and that there is only one set of ruts, so there is only one place to drive. One family member says that Jack Madruga wouldn't have driven up there unless he was made to do it. Shones is later asked if he was intoxicated that night, having been to 2 bars prior to getting stuck in the snow. Shones says that he wasn't drunk. They ask if he drank anything at all that night, and Shones says that he drank 1 beer. After leaving the mountain house, Shones says that he didn't have anything to do, and he realized that he hadn't been up there in the mountains before, so he decided to just go and check it out. He says that he never thought about checking the snow line, or even that there would be snow up there. He says he probably should have asked someone, but it didn't occur to him. A family member asks him to confirm or deny a previous report that he went to go check on the snow line because he wanted to take his family up there the next day. Shones denies that's what he was doing. Later, a family member asks Shones if he begged the Yuba County Sheriff to give him a lie detector test or ask him questions under hypnosis. Shones says that he didn't beg them, but he made the suggestion. Later, it is clarified that he was not hypnotized because the sheriff was worried he might relive a traumatic event and cause another heart attack, and the sheriff was afraid of a lawsuit. Why he wasn't put on a lie detector is unclear. One of the family members states that they once had a heart attack and they weren't even able to walk out of the house to get to their car, signaling that they are a bit incredulous that Shones was able to walk 7 miles after a heart attack. Shones says that the doctors told him that he was already self-stabilized by the time he started his walk to the mountain house. Shones then gives the family a prescription he had received from the doctor to treat his heart attack, and a family member reads the note into the recording device. It said that Shones had a mild myocardial infarction heart attack, and Shones wasn't to be bothered by police and reporters for 2 months, and signed by a Dr. Davis. Shones later tells the families that he knows for a certainty that he saw nothing that night that his mind would try to blank out or make him forget. He thinks he is a pretty strong person who already had some experiences in the war, so he doesn't think that kind of thing would happen to him. This seems to be in response to some more questions about undergoing hypnosis. Shones is asked about his prior work history, and he says that he was a social worker, working with mentally handicapped people and alcoholics. Shones briefly speaks about his mentally handicapped daughter, who was 18 at the time. He said that he had taken her up to that area a couple times before and asked her what she would do if she were in the Yuba Boys situation. His daughter apparently said, "Head down the hill, no question about it." Shones is asked if his wife knew that he came to the interview that day, and he says she doesn't. It is a bit unclear, but the topic of his wife being in politics and the possible negative blowback of the Yuba 5 case and Shones' involvement seems to be brought up. Lastly, a person who is likely Jack Madruga's mother makes a long statement about her son and his capabilities. She appears hurt that the newspapers were calling him retarded. In her eyes, he wasn't. She says that he was just bashful and timid, but he had finished school, gone to college, and was in Vietnam. She felt certain that Jack would not have gone off on a road like that. There is more, but that is the most interesting stuff with audio that is recognizable enough to draw a conclusion. So, if you're already familiar with Joseph Shones' different stories, then you might have picked up on some interesting alterations to his story during this interview. For example, Shones told the parents that he had only had one beer that night, despite visiting 2 bars, the Brush Creek Bar and the Mountain House. Shones told the Yuba County Sheriff that he had had 1 beer at each establishment, so 2. But the bartender at the Mountain House that night distinctly remembered that Shones had 3 beers at the Mountain House alone. The bartender at the Brush Creek Bar wasn't interviewed, so we really don't know how many he had there, but he clearly seems to be trying to hide the fact that he was likely drunk that night. The amount of beers he drank that night seems to diminish with each retelling of his story. Let's move on to the reason that Shones was up there in the first place, which he told the parents that he only went up into the mountains because he had never been up there before. He never considered that there would be snow, and he didn't think to ask the Mountain House bartender if there was, or if it was even a good idea. But he told the Yuba County Sheriff a completely different story. He headed up the hill to check the snow line. He explained that his family would be up over the weekend, and he anticipated they would go play in the snow, and he was curious where the snow line was and wanted to kill a little bit of time. The families had likely heard this same story when it was reported in the newspapers, but in their interview with Shones, he completely denies it. He says he wasn't looking for anything, he just wanted to go for a drive, basically. I believe at one point he says he was just horsing around. I'll add a note from the Mountain House bartender to this as well. When she was interviewed, she said that she thought it was very strange at that time that he did go in that direction, because he lived in the area, and he knew that occasionally vehicles did get stuck, and that there was very little traffic up in that area, and he may have serious problems if he did become stuck. Moving on, there seem to be little discrepancies when it comes to his descriptions of his encounter with the boys. For example, the color of the pickup truck he says he saw that night. In the Yuba County report, he called it rust or red-colored. When he is interviewed by the parents, he denies that he ever stated a color and instead says that the color red or rust might have been suggested to him by authorities and he just went along with it. Beyond that, when it comes to how the boys and the others left, he almost tells 2 stories to the parents. He says at one point that they tried to start the car and couldn't, so they left. And then later he says it was like they were there and then they were gone, and he wondered if he had ever even seen them at all. Kind of making it sound like he was hallucinating, which was something that he told to both the sheriff and the newspapers. It's almost used as an excuse, like he had been hallucinating, so don't pin him down on any details. He told the authorities in his official statement that the lights of the vehicle went out. The vehicle then started. All the figures got into the second vehicle, the pickup, and left the area. That is a whole lot more than just they were there and then they were gone. The funny thing about Shones getting kind of vague with the family is that he was very specific with the sheriff's deputies, right down to saying that the pickup truck was parked behind the Montego at an angle, when the headlights went on and off, what the figures were doing generally, and other small details. It was clearly noted in the sheriff's report that Shones emphasized how bright it was that night due to the moonlight, which made seeing things easier for him. A topic which has often caught viewers' attention is Shones' heart attack. Some people think he never had one, some believe that he did, and maybe he really was hallucinating. Well, we finally got a clear diagnosis from this audio tape. He had a mild myocardial infarction, also known as a mini heart attack. So, not to downplay the severity of anything, but this wasn't a full-fledged heart attack. Symptoms include chest pain and discomfort, pain radiating to the left arm, shoulder, neck, and jaw, shortness of breath, nausea, and fatigue. Hallucinations are not a symptom of a mini heart attack. Though, if we're being generous, you could argue that he entered a state of delirium afterwards, which led to hallucinations. But that might be overly generous. Shones' retelling of events is quite detailed, and I wouldn't expect that of someone experiencing a severe state of delirium. Moving on, Shones contradicted himself another time while talking to the parents. Early in the conversation, he is asked if the boys said anything to him. He responds by saying that they didn't, and that since he was laying down in the back seat of the car and they didn't have much light, perhaps they weren't able to see him. But only minutes later, he's talking about how he had his headlights and taillights on, and his car was getting too hot, but he couldn't reach the heater controls. Instead, he would crack a window and the door to cool himself down. When he cracked the door, the interior light would come on. He then says there is no question about him not being seen. This makes sense. If the interior light was on when someone approached his vehicle, he should be clearly visible. But he maintains that nobody spoke to him throughout the whole encounter. You might have noticed that most of the time when I'm pointing out these contradictions in Shones' stories, I am comparing it to the statements he gave to the Yuba County Sheriff. Mr. Shones gave two statements to the sheriff, a shorter one which was done over the phone, and a much longer and more detailed one which was done in person at the hospital. If I really wanted to hammer these contradictions home, I would also compare this interview to statements he gave to newspapers, because the trend only continues. For example, in one newspaper, he's quoted as saying he saw the Yuba boys run off into the bushes instead of leaving in a truck. I chose not to use newspapers as a comparison for one reason. In this interview that Shones did with the families, there are a few times that he complains about how inaccurate the newspapers were when reporting on this story. At one point, he speaks about how he had hired a lawyer and he was going to seek a retraction, likely from the LA Times. Given how shady Shones has looked, I know that his hiring of a lawyer might not mean much. I mean, who knows if he actually did that, but anyway, given that Shones expressed clear frustration with the reporting of the newspapers, I figured I might as well give him the benefit of the doubt and not include them. But even without them, there are plenty more inconsistencies to pick apart between this interview and the Yuba County Sheriff's report. But it is a great thing to actually have some testimony directly from Shones' mouth, even if it is garbled in parts, rather than only getting his story written out by a third party. To me, Joseph Shones has always been at the center of this case, even if I don't know his exact involvement. He was the one thing standing between the Yuba boys and death up in those hills. Something happened that night, and it happened at one single spot on a lonely road. Because of that, having a good visual of this location seems paramount. It's the spot where the cars were, where both Shones and the Yuba boys became stuck in the snow. It's a pivotal point in the story. This is the spot where the decision must have been made for the boys to start walking upward to their deaths. So, I set out on a trip to follow in the footsteps of the Yuba Five on the night they disappeared. So I went out to California, and since I was going that far, I figured I might as well do the drive that the Yuba Five did, going up Highway 99 to Chico, driving through town, and then stopping by the university. Well, folks, this is my first stop. I am at California State University in Chico. This is where the boys started their night. They had a basketball game here, and then they left. And they left for Bears Market. But they began here. After driving here from Yuba City, they took 99, presumably, and came here to watch a basketball game as they were big fans of basketball. Now, this is just a brief stop in the night, and probably nothing of any incident happened here. Everyone said they were acting normal. They watched the game. One of them kept score, and then they left. Nothing unusual happened so far, and seemingly nothing happened at Bears Market either. But for some reason, they left this area, started heading back on 99, and took a wrong turn. So let's start heading in that direction. Moving back through town, we know the boys stopped at Bears Market and got some snacks, and then they must have hit the highway again. This is where something strange happened. They must have taken a turn off to Oroville, and this would be something very difficult to do accidentally. Even if you did, there are countless opportunities to turn around. Once you hit Oroville, there are enough twists and turns you have to make to reach the Oro-Quincy Highway that it becomes clear that there must be some intention to the decisions the boys made. To me, the question becomes, what would lure or drive them out this direction? Once you hit Oroville, there are countless different directions you could go, countless places to pull over and assess your situation. But the boys took a route that took them across the Bidwell Bar Bridge and up into the mountainous region above Oroville. As you start traveling up into the mountains, the road is windy and the going can be slow. Again, if you were lost, there would be so much time to talk and assess the situation. Their drive up into the mountains would have taken about an hour, at the very least. Plenty of time to talk about what was happening, but never once did they make the decision to stop and turn around. You wonder what their conversations must have been like when they traveled up this way. Was their talking light and cheerful? Was it tense and quiet? Were they arguing? Was this drive somehow against their will? It's a question we'll likely never have an answer to. But at night, this road becomes a dark and lonely one, with no lights and rarely another vehicle on the road. When I imagine what their drive must have been like, I see it being tense and quiet, with Jack Madruga slowly and cautiously making his way up this road. Driving on a windy road in the dark almost forces you to drive this way. They continued up for miles until they reached the snow, and even then, they didn't turn around. The only thing that seemingly stopped the boys' vehicle was encountering a Volkswagen Beetle, already stuck in the middle of the road. Well, as you can see, cars whizzing by. This hill behind me, this is where it all took place. This is where the Montego got stuck. This is where Schoen's vehicle was found. At least this is the closest approximation I can get from all of the info that I have so far received on locations of both vehicles. As we know, according to Schoen's and testimony of witnesses, Schoen's vehicle was found right here near this bend in the road. And further on down was the Montego. Now obviously we don't really know the order of events, but if you take at least one of Schoen's versions, it goes that he came up here because he wanted to see some snow. He found some snow and got stuck. And shortly thereafter he has a heart attack, and then he wakes up to some lights coming from behind him. And he sees that there's some cars back there, but he can't quite see very clearly. So he gets out of his vehicle and he starts shouting for help. No one's listening to him. So he climbs this hill right here. To get a better view of who's down this way. And according to him, he sees not only the Montego, but a red truck parked right behind it. And he sees anywhere from, I forget what it was, some ridiculous number, like 3 to 15 people. Or a number so varied that it makes you question the entire story. But he provided some descriptions at points. He said maybe he thought one of the people was a woman holding a baby. Schoen starts shouting again from atop this hill right here. But again, they ignore him. He gets no response. Obviously, it's probably tough to climb this hill, especially in the snow. But still they ignore him, and apparently everyone piles into the red truck, which, you know, doesn't make sense if there's as many as 10 or more people. But he says everyone got into the truck and drives away, leaving the Montego here. Just in the snow, apparently, but everyone who saw it said it wasn't really stuck. You could get it out real easily. So that really puts a lot of questions on Schoen's story here, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, as we know, Schoen's is a completely unreliable narrator. He's told many different stories as far as this goes, and the first one he ever told was that he was being followed up this highway right here by a car that was basically tailgating him, and he felt like he was forced up this highway until he got stuck in the snow on this bend right here. At which point, what? He doesn't really say. He's talking to these people that are giving him a ride, saying that, well, this car was following me and tailgating me up until I got to the snow point, at which point I got stuck. And he was really angry about it, so angry that he started having a mild heart attack, supposedly. But then what? What about the people that were following him? He didn't say anything about that to these witnesses that heard this first story. And again, these were the people that gave Schoen's a ride from the mountain house back to his home after he made the long walk from this location down to the mountain house. So, which story do you want to believe, really? The story that Schoen's was followed up this highway by a car that was tailgating him, possibly the boys, but again, what would they be doing here? So you got at least two stories. The one that Schoen's eventually stuck with was the one with the red truck. And I don't know that he was ever fully confronted with the first story that he told to the witnesses who gave him a ride. If he was confronted with the fact that, hey, what did you mean when you say this car was tailgating you to the point that you got stuck in the snow? And there was nothing like that in the reports that I read on this case, which feels like a big missed opportunity in a sense, because it's important that we get the true story from Schoen's. What did he really mean, and what was he even talking about? Because he's obviously lying somewhere. Or unless you want to go with the story that he was having a heart attack, and so much of whatever happened is just kind of a mystery to even him, that he can't really remember what's happening. Sorry about that, we get a lot of cars on this road still. And you might notice that the road today is fully paved, and it's actually one of the nicer highways I've been on in California, to be honest with you. Not a lot of potholes. It was easy to get up here. But to me, this spot right here is the most important spot of the entire case. Not the trailer, none of that, because whatever happened here has bearing on this entire, what the cause of all this was. Now, initially, obviously, we need to know why the boys would head up in this direction in the first place. But whatever took place here at this turn is what forced the boys out of their car and up into the mountains. And let me tell you, I've already been up driving up ahead. It is no small feat just to get up to where the forest road begins. So whatever happened here was something serious. It was something that the boys didn't anticipate. They must have been afraid for their lives to start heading up instead of down, because they just came from that direction. They knew Oroville is that way, and safety. You can see a lot of people are driving by wondering what this crazy man is doing here on this random roadside talking into a camera. But most people probably just pass right by this area without realizing that a big mystery occurred here over 45 years ago. And it still endures today. But again, the big question, why did they come up here? And when they got here, what happened that forced them out of their car and up this hellish road and possibly 20 miles of walking to a forest trailer where at least 3 of them probably died along the way? It was something I could not stop thinking about on the ride up here. You just have so much time to ride in that car and think about what you're doing and where you're going. And so to me, whatever they were doing heading up this way, it seems intentional. It doesn't seem like they were lost. Someone would have said something, the conversation would have gone on long enough that they would have realized they were going the wrong way. So the question is, what were they doing up here? And to me, either they were intentionally going this way for some reason that we just don't know, or some people have suggested that someone else was in the car and was essentially forcing the boys up this way. Others have suggested that maybe there was another car that was following them that was forcing them up this way. But even that, I mean, what, we're talking about a car chase for an hour up a slow mountain road? I don't know. It's one of these things that I really can't wrap my head around what occurred to bring them here and then what occurred at this location. Because you got 2 big mysteries. Why did they come up here in the first place? And what happened once they got to this spot? Because Shones is telling all kinds of weird nonsense stories that don't make a lot of sense. He's bringing red herrings in the form of a red truck seemingly, and telling completely different stories initially to witnesses. And again, I put the most bearing on his first story because that is the story that he told before he knew there was going to be any investigation, before he knew that the boys were lost, before he knew that the boys were possibly dead. So, to me, and I never said this in the first video I did on the Yuba County 5, but I've always gotten the sense that what happened was some sort of road rage incident. Now, this doesn't explain why the boys would be here in the first place, but I've always got the feeling that what happened is that the boys were up this way, they started tailgating Shones, he got stuck in this spot, he got angry. Now, it's been known and said a lot of times that the people in Berry Creek and up in the mountains here, this is a very rural area, that the people at that time carried a lot of guns. And I wouldn't put it past Shones to have carried a gun in his Volkswagen. And in the first video I said maybe he threatened the boys, but in my mind what I always had pictured was that he didn't just threaten them with his words, he threatened them with a firearm and maybe forced them to head up this way. And of course he was probably still buzzed at the time, who knows? But something had to force those 5 men up this way that they were afraid of. And one of the few things that would be is a firearm, someone pointing a gun at them, because obviously the 5 of them can overpower the one of him very easily. But a firearm changes the game. So was that in play? And I tend to think it was something like that, that maybe Shones was so angry he pointed a gun at them and just had them start walking. And the boys were so afraid they started walking and they didn't turn back. To me, that makes the most sense, that they would leave because someone threatened them with a gun, threatened them with death, and so they took their chances heading up. But again, that's why it's a mystery. We simply don't know. And Shones is dead, so he's not going to be telling that story. As you may have noticed, fire has torn through this entire area. And it's kind of created a lot of problems and road issues, but it seems to have opened up mostly. And the road up here is quite nice, but this whole area is just completely burned out. There's not a lot of greenery. You can tell before there would have been a very lush and green forest here. And it just kind of goes to show how time changes all things, because the mountain house is no longer here. The trailer camp, which we will head up to shortly, or try to head up to, I almost don't know if there's any point to going there because there's nothing there. That's what I'm getting at. It's just an empty lot. I've seen pictures of it. And so to get there, you'd have to go through a lot of forest road or take a shortcut through the woods. But then you'd just be taking a shortcut to a patch of land that's empty. And sometimes when I'm out doing these things, I wonder if there's any point to doing that. because this case is more about the journey they took and about what happened at this location I'm at right now. But another thing that's not the same is the forest, because it's mostly all dead now thanks to forest fires. So 45 years has changed this area quite a bit, to the point where very little is left from what happened in February of 1978. One point to consider as I keep staying here and looking at this area is Shones, a man who claims to have had a heart attack, knows that there's a car out over here, and so he decides that he is going to climb this hill in the snow to get a better vantage point. I'm sure this doesn't come across well on this camera, but that hill, you're going to have to climb up it, and I'm sure it would be even worse in the snow. It's not very tall, granted, but this man is supposedly having a heart attack and, defecating all around his car and vomiting, and yet he is climbing this hill to get a better vantage point on cars that are just right here. So why didn't he just walk over there? It's a valid question, and it doesn't make any sense to me standing here and looking at it. It would be so much easier to just walk around this bend right here than to try and climb up that hill. But I'm thinking about Shones' perspective. Why didn't he just walk over here? I just did it in the time I'm talking to you. I walked from about where Shones' car was to where he could have seen the people, he could have contacted them, could have gotten help, but he didn't. So again, after actually being here for a while and looking at this, Shones' statement that he made to police makes no sense. There is no reason to climb this hill instead of just walking around the bend here, walking around this bend here, and coming and talking to the people in the Montego and the people that were supposedly in the red truck. Again, his first story makes the most sense. He was tailgated by someone, probably the boys, and some sort of road rage incident took place. And during that road rage incident, Shones pulled a gun or some kind of weapon and threatened the boys to force them up the hill this way. If we're going by any of Shones' stories, that's the one that only really makes sense. And obviously I'm adding a lot on to it because all he told those witnesses was that a car was tailgating him and it forced him to get stuck in the snow. But he admitted he was really angry about it. So it makes the most sense that that was the boys and that he did something to force them up. Again, it doesn't answer why they were here in the first place, but it answers the critical question of why the boys were forced upwards and into that forested area where the trailers are, why they walked themselves to death. In order for you to walk yourself to death in those conditions, you must have thought that heading back the other direction meant certain death, and you would rather take the chance of going up into the snow than going back the way you came. It's the only thing I can think of that would make sense for 5 men together to be heading in that direction. Let's head up the road a bit, get to the point where the forest road begins, and see what that forest road looks like today and what they had to travel down, what they had to endure in the snow, and just get a feel for what they went through. Because from this point on, it's not really a mystery so much as it is just a story of survival. Beyond the point that we don't know what happened to Matthias, but you have a pretty good idea that he probably left on his own and headed north up the hill and probably died in the woods.
Driving further up the road, you realize that even the walk up the highway wasn't a short distance, coming in at around 5 miles. This was the point that the boys turned right onto a forest road leading into the Granite Basin. Why did they do this? Likely because a snowcat had come this way prior to their arrival and had gone to the Forest Service trailers. The tracks and flattened snow left by the snowcat likely gave the boys a path to follow that felt like it might lead somewhere helpful to them. Unfortunately, they were on a death march.
So behind me is the road that I believe the Yuba 5 would have turned down after walking up the Oro Quincy Highway from the point where they left the vehicle. Now it's still quite a way
just to get up here, but I think this road makes the most sense. There are indications that this road was still paved even back then, and obviously they seem to have been following some snowcat tracks, and I think if a snowcat was going to head off into these forest roads, they would obviously try and go down maybe the paved road. And there is one other road that kind of reconnects with this one, but it seems to be of a lesser quality. So I think this one is the likeliest turn they would have taken, given where all their bodies were found. And again, it seems like they took the longest route possible, again, based on where their bodies were found. And this probably was the start of their turn off onto the forest roads, probably following the snowcat tracks. And if this road was paved, you know, it probably seemed like a reasonable way to go. But still, we're at this point where how would they even get up this far? What reasoning would they have to be up this far? This is insane. It goes up, it takes so long to get here. It's so slow. What kind of discussions were they having? Why would they be here? So that's the big question here. Gonna go down this road a bit and give it a look.
Going down the forest road, it's not long before you reach a junction. You can either continue down the path you were on, or head north, or even back the way you came. The north route is actually much shorter than the one the boys took. The issue is, these roads are dirt and not well maintained. The long path around the basin is the smoother ride to reach the forest trailers, and likely was back in the day as well. The road we see in the video has almost certainly seen work done on it since 1978. But even back then, at least one newspaper referred to this road as a paved stretch of logging road. Many often wonder why the boys took this long route, and that's probably the answer. The snowcat followed the safest path of travel for it to get to the trailers, which would have been the paved one, and the boys followed the tracks left by the cat.
So originally I was going to be heading down this road, and walking down it a bit I can see that obviously the wildfire came through here and burned up all the trees in this area, as you can tell. But they haven't cleaned up this part of the forest road yet. There's still a ton of downed, burnt logs and stuff in the road, and I'm not going to try and go down there. Obviously they haven't been through here, they haven't cleaned it up. It's a mess, and I'm not interested in popping a tire by going down there. The option is open to walk, but I think I have another plan for that. But it's interesting to be in this area, very remote. You're just walking through the deep mountainous woods right here, and you know, you try to get a sense of what it would have been like for them. Much different for myself, as it often is when I come to places. Obviously it's in the high 80s, I think, right now. Would have been very cold for them, obviously, snow on the ground. But you're just walking through a long, windy road in the deep woods, pines everywhere. It would have been a hellish walk. And given that none of them particularly enjoyed the cold and snow, and maybe even the dark as well, you can imagine that this would have been just a terrifying journey that they would have been making. And it just continues to baffle me. I wonder what forced them up here and what forced them into walking this path. I mean, it's an unimaginable thing, you know, having to do 20 miles without proper gear in the snow. It's no wonder to me that they, at least 3 of them, died on the road there. And I firmly believe that they probably died, those 3, on the way to the trailer. You know, just that kind of mileage and that kind of cold, not having the proper gear. Think of how Ted Wire was when he actually made it to the trailer. Feet frostbitten, his toes falling off. You can imagine that the other guys were probably in no better condition when they fell on the roadside. And it's amazing that anyone who even made it to the trailer was able to walk out of there. And I'm talking about Matthias, that he presumably walked out of there and that he was in any condition to do that. But of the 5, as I've said, he would be the one who would probably be able to tough that out and get out of there. So let's continue having a look around. Alright, I'm just moving down the forest road on foot for a little while just to see what it's like. I think I'm going to try and take a shortcut to the camp. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm going to see what it looks like. Originally, I was going to try and do the entire walk from where the forest road starts all the way to where the trailer was. That was my original ambition when I was planning this in my head months ago. And here in action, it's a hot day and my feet have been absolutely destroyed after hiking in Yosemite for a few days, so I'm going to limit my mileage a bit and try and not walk an incredible distance to the trailers and then back to my vehicle. But sometimes my thinking is terrible. Anyway. When you're here, I can't help but attempt to put myself in the headspace of the 5 men that walked this road more than 45 years ago, and just try and wonder what they were thinking when they were here. You know, I can't tell you how often I come to these places, and I wish I could have just been there. You know, as tragic as it was, I wish I could have been there to see what developed into this situation. You know, I mean, you got to imagine these guys were walking for miles together in a group. What were they talking about? You know, what were they thinking? Because they must have had conversations as they were walking this way towards the trailer about, you know, how are we going to survive this? Where are we going? What's our plan? I wonder what they were going through. And obviously it must have entailed a lot of suffering. And unfortunately, in ways, you know, this place has changed so much. The trailers are no longer there. It's just an empty lot. The mountain house is no longer there. You know, the roads are still here. But heck, even most of this forest is gone now. Though some still does remain. But obviously a lot changes in 45 years.
The forest roads in this area go on for miles and miles. It continues to put into perspective the slow and arduous journey the Yuba 5 must have endured while walking this winding and lonely road in the middle of the night. You could take this road directly to the spot where the service trailers used to be. Again, there's simply nothing there anymore. I did have a thought to go to this area, but I wanted to try a different route that a viewer had sent to me. If you go on the road above the trailer's location and above the Granite Basin, then you can walk down the steep hillside to the forest road below. In terms of walking, it's a much shorter trip, but I was more interested in this route for a different reason. This road was where the blankets and flashlight were found, and if Gary Mathias walked out of the trailer back in 1978, I believe he came up this direction. Going here and walking around in this region would give me an opportunity to understand the terrain and possibly spot some evidence. After so many years, the last part is a real long shot. So I left the Granite Basin roads that the Yuba 5 used and continued along the highway, taking a right onto the other forest road that travels along the top of the basin. You do wonder how those blankets and the flashlight got up here. Why were they dropped? When it's cold and dark, those resources are invaluable. Would anyone have been driving around up here at that time? It would have been weeks after the initial disappearance. Did Gary or whoever dropped them discard them out of simple exhaustion? It seems like it was more than a coincidence that they were found at the road, rather than just some random place in the forest.
But what does it mean? I wanted to experience that climb for myself. Well, I'm going to attempt to kind of connect with another forest road and go off trail so that I can maybe get down to where the Forest Service trailer camp was. Right now I'm up in the area where I think Gary Mathias would have been heading. It's the forest road just above the camp that kind of connects back with the Oro Quincy Highway. I think he came up this way mainly because there was some evidence found, blankets, and I think some other things that were heading in this direction and made it seem like maybe he dropped those things as he was heading this way. So I kind of think Gary Mathias probably died in the woods somewhere around here where I am now, north of the Forest Service camp, as he was trying to get out. But I'm going to be heading down into the Forest Service camp, or trying to, not that a camp's there anymore, just to get a look at the area. So we'll see how that goes. Got some off trail to do, so let's get to it. I spent a lot of time walking along this hillside, searching it really. The ground was very visible, and I took it slow, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Whenever I do something for this channel that involves me going off trail, I almost always bring a hiking buddy along. I've talked about too many deadly cases on this channel to not do something like that. So I had a hiking buddy with me on this day. That way, if someone gets hurt or injured, there's somebody else to help or to get help. Well, while we were searching this hillside, my friend must have stepped on a nest of ground hornets or something like that. I didn't see what happened, I just saw a lot of hornets attacking them, and they were stung quite a few times. At that point, the hike was over and it was time to go. So I didn't make it to the forest trailer lot and couldn't spend as much time as I wanted searching the hillside. It's worth noting that this area is very steep. It's a tough hike upward, and for someone in poor condition, like, say, Gary Mathias, it probably would have taken a long time to get to the top, but maybe it seemed like the best option. If he chose to walk back on the road that took him to the trailers, he knew it would have been just another nearly 20 miles of nothingness. If Mathias made it to this road, which way would he go? East or west? He'd just have to pick one at random and hope for the best. However, this leads to another issue. If Gary Mathias came to a road, wouldn't he stay on the road and continue walking until he died? But his body was never discovered on the side of any road up here. Though that might not mean much, because I don't know how well they really looked up here. I suppose it's also possible that hypothermia led to confusion, as it tends to do. In that case, he could have just walked off in any direction, slowly plodding along until he collapsed. Of course, nobody really knows what happened on the night of February 24th, 1978, but whatever it was, I feel almost certain that Joseph Shones knew more than he said. This is a guy who told one story to the police and media, within which elements kept changing with every retelling, and he told a completely different story to the people who gave him a ride home on February 25th. I mean, with the sheriff alone, in his first interview he says there was no red truck. He said that there was only a Montego and that he didn't really even see it leave. Then, in his second interview with the sheriff, he says there was a red truck, and he gets real specific about the details. There are so many things in this official story that you can pull apart, so many things that just don't make sense. Shones is in the back seat of his car, dying from a heart attack. The interior light is on, and people approach his window, but he continues to stay there. He says he calls for help and he gets no response, but he makes no attempt to get out and approach these people who are just outside his door. Does that make sense? He makes it sound like he was calling for help from ghosts who couldn't hear or respond. This kind of thing makes me think it's all made up, because if he is inventing this story, and he starts claiming that the boys did talk to him, then he starts opening a really complicated can of worms for himself, because these 5 men had personalities and tendencies, and he didn't know them. It's much better to have a story where nobody even acknowledges your existence. And when Shones finally does exit his vehicle, instead of making the short and easy walk down the road to approach the group of people less than a block away, he makes the decision to climb a hill. When I think back to my time standing there on that road, I can't really see any reason to climb it. I mean, Shones was essentially already on a hill. It's pretty easy to see down the road from where he was. He says everyone piled into the truck and left the area, but there was no panic, nobody scattered into the night. Things seemed civil, like nothing bad was taking place. Almost like the red truck was there to help, but somehow the up to 12 people who were on scene couldn't push the Montego out of the snow. Shones and everyone else who saw the Montego admit it wasn't really stuck in the snow. How then could this group of people not push it? Why would they all leave in the pickup? Shones claims they turned around and left, but the boys' dead bodies are telling us they clearly started walking upwards past Shones' position. I feel like I could go on forever with these. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It is my belief that Shones' first story, the one he told before he knew there was going to be any criminal investigation, the one he told before he really had any time to think up anything else, is the most accurate version, wherein he says a car was following him so closely on the Oro-Quincy Highway that he felt forced up into the snow where his vehicle became stuck. He blamed the fact that he had a mini heart attack on this car that was following him. That scenario could make anyone very angry, and if the car that was behind him belonged to the Yuba boys, well, what happens next? Shones is stuck, so he has to get out of his car to see what the problem is. Wouldn't he approach the car that did this to him? It would be right behind him, right there in front of him. How could he not? Regardless of which version of the story Shones tells, he's angry in each of them. The driver's side window of Madruga's Montego was rolled down, which you would likely only do in the freezing mountains if you wanted to speak with someone standing outside the car. Did Madruga roll the window down so that he or one of the other boys could speak to Shones as he approached? Then I would ask, what are the odds that Shones carried a gun? The people of Berry Creek, the region where Shones lived, were known to be a bit of the country sort, carrying guns and all that. It's not too far-fetched to think that Shones did too, though that is entirely an assumption. But could he have forced the boys up into the mountains at gunpoint? If he did, maybe he didn't even think they would end up dead. Maybe he just wanted to frighten them, but he thought that they would find their way back down eventually, maybe even the next morning like he did. He had been drinking that night, after all. His thinking could have been clouded. Maybe he didn't realize the gravity of what he had done until he learned that all the boys were missing, at which point he had to change his story to cover himself. And to be painfully clear, because I know people like to get into the details on this case, the timeline I am proposing for this theory is this. Shones hits 2 bars on the evening of the 24th. He has quite a few beers and gets pretty drunk. He then heads up towards the snow. He does not get stuck yet because he lives here. He's good on the roads. He says as much to the families when they interviewed him. He basically claimed to be a rough road master. So he stops short of driving up into the snow, but he doesn't turn around. While there, he falls asleep in his car in the middle of the road. He probably never would have thought another car would come up that way. Then, sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, he gets awoken by the headlights of the Yuba boys who are heading up this way for reasons unknown to us. They stop behind Shones, shining their headlights into his car and whistling at him to get his attention. He wakes up startled. Realizing he is sitting in the road and blocking traffic, he instinctively starts his vehicle and begins moving forward, up into the snowy area of the mountains and the road. Shones searches for a place to pull over or turn around, but it's simply not possible. The further up he goes, the deeper the snow gets. Then, his car gets stuck. This makes him angry, so he gets out of his vehicle and confronts the Yuba boys. They try to back up in a hurry, but their wheels start spinning. This causes them to believe they are actually stuck. They eventually get out of their car, and a confrontation occurs that ends with Shones threatening the boys with a gun, forcing them up into the hills, and Shones subsequently has a mini heart attack from all the stress. The following morning, things play out the same way he later described. To me, this line of thinking makes the most sense. The only thing it doesn't account for is what the boys were doing up in the mountains to begin with. The reason for that may never be known, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a connection between Shones and why the boys were there in the first place. Some theories try to link Shones in, but that's difficult as there is no evidence he knew any of the 5, much less had the ability to lure them to a remote location like this. Shones did have a disabled daughter who attended a special school, and you wonder if they ever encountered the Yuba boys at some point, but as of today, we have no evidence to support that. Ultimately, any theory attempting to explain the Yuba County 5 disappearance has to try and account for a lot of elements that we know are true. So when I hear theories that just completely ignore Shones' involvement, I tend to immediately disregard them. Every theory has to account for Shones. Somehow and some way, the Yuba County 5 were forced up into the mountains, and in order to get there, they had to go through Joseph Shones. He's the only witness, and the only story he ever told that I take seriously is the one that he told to 2 witnesses when he was getting a ride home on the morning of the 25th. As usual, I'm interested in what you think. Let me know your theories in the comments below. Let me know what you think of my theory, and by all means pick it apart. This is one of those cases where it's going to take a lot of thinking and some solid investigative work if it's ever going to be solved. So the more people we have talking about it, the better. And until next time, thanks for watching.